Welcome to Alberta Conservation Association's Harvest Your Own podcast, the resource for everything hunting, navigating through the field, the butcher shop, and the kitchen. Life is all about great food. Let's get started.
Welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Brad Fenson, an avid outdoor enthusiast who has worked as a freelance journalist, photographer, and public speaker for over 3 decades. I have hunted, fished, and foraged all my life and hope to share my passion for the outdoors. Along the way, I want to encourage everyone to harvest wild proteins and enjoy the satisfaction of providing the next meal for your family. Our goal is to educate, entertain, and inspire individuals to get outdoors and create a connection between food, health, and your future meals. Welcome to Harvest Your Own. Today we're going to take a little trip down the fishing stream and talk about equipment. We're down at Korth Group today, and they have a very interesting facility here, well suited for representing outdoor brands in Canada. And more recently, they've got into some of the fishing products, which is a big part of what the rest of us will see down the road and on the shelves, sort of filling some niches and some voids that might have been there and offering more, not only availability, but more variety for anglers that are out there, no matter what you're chasing. So I've got Jaren here from Korth and Rob as well. You guys want to do a quick introduction and tell us who we're talking to?
Sure, yeah. Thanks, Brad. Appreciate the intro. My name's Jaren Baranyay. I'm I guess you could say the marketing manager. Well, I am the marketing manager for Korth Group, but recently I've been diving more and more into the purchasing and procurement side of things here at Korth Group. There's a lot going on with Korth that we'll dive into, but I've been helping a lot with the purchasing side of things as well. So juggling a couple different hats here. I've been here since 2017 and started out as the Alberta sales territory manager, and then moved to the marketing role, and then kind of more into the purchasing side of things.
Yeah, so. Very good. The listeners might remember you from the podcast we did with your dad as well, talking about hunting heritage and what your dad brought with Hungarian stories and food and all the rest of it. Rob, you're not new to the fishing industry.
No, I've been in the fishing industry since 1985, working in distribution only, and I moved to Big Rock Sports back in 2017. And last December, Big Rock went out of business, and there's this big opportunity for distribution in the fishing tackle marketplace now, and the Korth Group has stepped up to try to help fill that void.
It's quite a interesting history, and it go back to my original words. It's going to actually help anglers overall in terms of product being on shelves in different stores, gas stations, wherever you find fishing tackle. But it's also going to create more variety and quality options out there. Well,
currently in the marketplace, as far as distribution goes, there's sort of only 3 distributors in Western Canada, and we're the 4th. So the selection of product that's coming that will carry will fit all the anglers right across the country.
I was going to say, you're going to need more warehousing space and more opportunity to reach different parts of Canada, because the fishing industry is quite different than just firearms, ammunition, optics. Is this a big change for Korth?
Yeah. This is huge for Korth. We've things have been changing in this direction for now probably about 6 to 8 months, and then also with this change has come expansion of our brands as well. So us diving into the fishing market, there is a plethora of fishing brands that we're onboarding. We're also onboarding a lot more of the shooting and outdoor brands as well, which we're pretty excited about. So everywhere we look on the Korth tree, the branches are just growing, which is really exciting.
Yeah, it's an exciting time, but it's a lot of work making that change and bringing it on. Rob, you bring decades of experience. You must be able to help the team here a lot in terms of getting to know that industry because they know the firearms, ammunition, optics side of it very well. But this is a whole new outdoor adventure.
For sure. Well, way back in the beginning, when I was working at Rettle Sports, Terry Korth was servicing us back then. So I've got a relationship with Terry somewhat since 1985. It's a long time.
Well, and it's awesome to have Rob and Sean Gloka and Mark Harrison on our team as well. They're we've actually formed a fishing purchasing team with those three gentlemen, and they've been a great asset for us to get the fishing side of things going, not just from the business standpoint, but also the product and technical standpoint as well, which is really, really good.
Yeah, we talked about that briefly before we got started here. Is the hunting industry and fishing industry quite different?
I'm learning that, because I'm so new to the fishing industry that I'm starting to see that there obviously are similarities, but also differences as well. But I'm just drinking from the fire hose right now to learn about all the fishing side of things. And Rob and Sean and Mark are great assets to lean on.
Right. I think Rob, you mentioned that you have the right gun. They haven't really changed in decades. They shoot well. They should. It's up to the individual. There's been some advancements with optics and, of course, ammunition, but that whole industry is fairly stable in terms of what it provides. But fishing seems to be a moving target, a revolving door. It's hard to keep up with it.
It really is. It's people don't realize how regionalized fishing is. Like, I've been in Western Canada all my life, like in British Columbia, and so I'm really versed on what's going on there. Sean Gloka, my counterpart in Ontario, he used to charter before he got into the business back there, and he's really versed on fishing for literally everything back there, walleye, perch, pike, salmon, the steelhead in the rivers. He knows lots about what they use there. And a classic example of a difference will be in Ontario, the streams are like much more meandering. They're not except for the Niagara, they're not really steep. Whereas in British Columbia, everything coming out of the mountains is quite steep and glacial. And a standard steelhead rod in BC is 10.5 or 11 feet long. And most people are using 8, 10, 12, 15-pound test leader line and 20-pound or main line or greater. And in Ontario, most of the anglers using 13, 14, 15-foot rods and fishing 2, 4, and maybe 6-pound test.
Different game.
It's like completely, and you're fishing in theory for the same fish, a steelhead.
Right.
But it's just because of the rivers and techniques, and that's one of the biggest challenges for stores to stock product is what somebody in Vancouver sells, somebody in Prince George doesn't need. Somebody in Edmonton will sell gear that Calgary won't. Calgary's got a great fly fishing market down there, whereas, one of the best in Canada. And so they're really focused on that. And it just rolls across the country that way.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've noticed that over the years. I've been in Ontario fishing, and everyone has a canoe or even a moose look spoon. We haven't heard of those out here, but everyone here has a Len Thompson. And if you go to the coast, you got a Kamlooper or an Apex, or there's different regional lures that you have to key in on, and the stores have to have them because the people keep up with the fishing industry. They read the articles, see TV shows, pick up on what people are using to be successful, and they want to duplicate it. So it makes for a very challenging market, being able to keep up with that on a regional or even a store basis.
Well, and that's why, having Rob in the West, Sean in the East, and understanding what market needs what products.
Walleye are kind of the thing that from the Rockies east, they're everywhere, or pretty much in pike, at least for a big majority of the country. And so there is some generic cover and product there, but from I'm going to say the central part of British Columbia till you get to Ontario, there's no salmon. BC has no pike. They've got a small little walleye fishery in an area in the Columbia River in the southeast, right? And it's just so different.
Well,
and then you get the migration of people moving from Ontario to BC or New Brunswick to Alberta, and the mindset on what to buy in fishing tackle has changed drastically also.
Well, and that's one of our biggest challenge, but it is our vision here at Korth Group. One of our visions is we strive to be a stocking distributor. We are making sure that we have what people need at certain times of the year. Right.
And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this podcast, is because we want to take the basics to the anglers out there that are getting started. We have the Kids Can Catch programs. We've got a lot of stuff on Harvest Your Own to teach people or encourage them to get into fishing.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to basically break this down and do a fishing 101. There's no dumb questions. So this would be like the general public asking us things. And if we go right back to basics, the importance of choosing a rod, reel, and line are important. The right weight, the right length, how sensitive it is. If you can't feel a bite, you can't set a hook, you can't catch the fish. So, when we look at reel styles, for instance, Rob, what are the varieties that most Alberta anglers are going to see on the shelf, and what are their applications?
Well, you're going to see level wind conventional trolling reels for guys that are trolling in lakes with line counters on the reel in general, so they can easily let a lure out, 50, 75, or 100 feet behind the boat, whatever they deem is required. And then the next thing up will be spin reels. Spinning reels are universal across the country, and probably the best selling size is like a 2500 size. It would be everybody's, be it Daiwa, Okuma, whoever. It's going to be a 2500 size reel. You can kind of use it for 90% of your fishing for almost anything, because you can take it and you can fill it with 6-pound line. You can fill it with 50-pound braid. So you can fish a wide range of fish and techniques with it. And those would be the two biggest. And then of course there's fly reels for the fly market.
Hey Rob, can I just ask a question here for the listener and myself as well for learning? What did you mean by a 2500?
Spinning reels are sized usually by something in the thousands. So there's it starts at a 500 size, which would be something you'd use for ice fishing, 2 or 4 pound test line on it. It's a very small reel. Then it goes to 1,000, then 1,500, then 2,000, 2,500, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000, and 8,000 usually. 8,000 are really big reels where somebody would fish sturgeon in British Columbia with, or some sort of large species, and the guts of the for all consumers, they most likely want to start with a 2,500 or a 3,000 size reel. It matches up with most of the rods in the 6 foot to 8 foot length. It balances outright, and it's like the generic you must have. It's kind of like the Q-tip or the aspirin of fishing, right? Is having that size of a reel.
Okay. Yeah, the bigger the number, the bigger the reel, the heavier the line it can hold, and probably to some degree the stronger the drag system as well.
Yeah, drag systems usually move up in price points, because a generic reel that's, I'm going to say, a $20 retail price point is really bare bones, cheapest parts, cheapest bits put into it. And then as you start moving up the price point, you'll see the body shape of spinning reels. They'll remain the same, but you'll start with a reel that has bushings inside and maybe a cork drag. And then the next price point up, it has 1 ball bearing. The next price point up, it's got 2. The next, and they put it in the right place so the reel feels real smooth. Then the next price point up, you get 3 or 4, and they go all the way up to having 10 or 12 bearings in them. So at different price point levels. And then the drags all switch to carbon fiber and things like that. And then some reels, you have an anti-reverse on it, so you can only reel one way. The minute you try to back reel, it stops instantly. Other reels will have a switch, so you can reel one way to bring your line in. You can flick the switch over at the back of the reel and back turn a bit to let line out if you, for some reason, so choose to do it based on the technique maybe you're fishing.
Right. That's a pretty good description, because there's a wide variety and diversity of products and quality. I think for the beginner, you look for something with some ball bearings. Get the right size, like you said, because it helps balance a rod that you're using, especially in the West. If you're fishing for walleye, pike, even most of our stock lakes for trout and stuff, that 6 to 7.5 foot rod is very important.
This podcast is produced for Harvest Your Own, a program dedicated to those who want to reconnect with food and health through their experiences outdoors. HarvestYourOwn.ca is a resource for individuals to learn more about hunting and the outdoors. There's information to get you started and ensure that your compass stays pointed in the right direction to be successful. Where's your next meal coming from?
We didn't cover spin cast reels, although they do have a market. I mean, my girls started casting in the driveway, learning how to throw some rubber stoppers when they were 2 years old, and that was with a spin cast, or what a lot of people call closed-faced reels.
Yeah. So spin cast closed-faced reels in the market in general, they're more of an entry-level thing. They do make some higher quality ones, but the sales in Canada and the demand for them is very minimal once you get past almost what you described. A young girl, young boy going out with dad for the first time, and they go and buy very much a price point outfit as a combo. Most of the sales in spin cast is in combos, and so they buy one, and the young lad or whatever sits standing on a dock pitching out something because they don't tangle that easy. He can cast it in and start reeling it in too far and pitch it out again. And if he breaks it, and if he breaks it, you're only out $20-$25 instead of giving him $100 rod that he steps on by accident.
It's important to know the difference, though, when you go into a fishing tackle shop to ask for a spinning versus a spin cast. They sound a lot alike, but they're very different in terms of operation, price, quality, and all the rest of it.
Yes. Well, one of the other big differences is a spin cast, you turn the rod literally upside down and you reel with your right hand. Your left hand, the rod would have like a trigger grip on it, and there's a little thumb bar at the back of the reel that you push in. You hold it in place, then as you cast the line out, you release the thumb bar and the lure sails out or however far based on the weight of the lure and your casting technique. When it hits the water, you just start reeling it back in. A spinning reel, in most cases, you reel with your left hand, and when you reel it up to your lure within like a foot of the rod tip, you should stop. Then when you go to cast, you have to flip a bail over, hold the line in your one of your fingers, and as you cast, you sort of point your finger that you're holding the line with out, so it releases the line, and then it sails way out there. And then when you start to reel, you flip the bail back over, and then you start reeling it in. And you can, on spinning reels, switch from a left-hand reel to a right-hand reel, depending on how you like to reel. Most people reel with their left hand. But on spin cast, you can very rarely go left to right.
Most really people ambidextrous, really.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
Interesting. Now, when we look at rods, a rod is very important as far as I'm concerned, because that's really the telegraph system between your hook and line and your reel in terms of what you feel and how you fight the fish. It also works as a shock absorber. So a rod's very important. Again, we should talk about the different styles and quality and what to look for, because it's a big part of the investment in terms of being successful when you do head afield.
Yeah. So on fishing rods, you can buy them made out of like a fiberglass type resin material. Like lots of times they'll call them plastic, and whatnot, but they're a fiberglass resin material for the budget entry level stuff. Then there's a composite where there's a bit of graphite mixed with the fiberglass, and to make it more sensitive. But depending on the price point you're buying one at, some they got just like a sliver of graphite in, where others are going to be, 50% graphite and 50% fiberglass. So they're called composites, like graphite composites. And then you get all graphite rods, which are graphite's measured in a tonnage. Like there's 24 ton, 36 ton, and 30 ton. There's different tonnages, and it's all to do with compression. And the higher the tonnage, it becomes more sensitive. It's like it compresses more, it becomes much more sensitive, but in most cases, it also becomes more brittle.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
So it's easier to break.
Right. They cost more money, but they're unforgiving if you try to put them on the edge of the boat or bend them.
Yeah, you
grab the line.
Hard or something.
Yep. Pull the line out of the end to put your leader on, and your rod snaps on you.
Yep.
Yeah. So in the most recent years, they've developed some new resins that actually hold it all together that absorb a bunch of the shock, so they're much less likely to break. There's, I think Pure Fishing owns the marketplace on a resin called Powerlux. They've trademarked that name so no one else can use it, but others have it, and they're using it. And then there's also a product called graphene that they're putting into fishing rods or making fishing rod blanks with, and it's like way more sensitive than just graphite. And the fly market really likes it, fly fishing wise, because when you go to cast and you stop your cast, the rod doesn't keep flexing. Like if you take a fiberglass rod versus a composite rod versus a graphite rod versus a graphene rod, if you give it a wiggle, the fiberglass keeps wiggling it and finally dampens down, whereas a graphene rod, it stops instantly. And so that will help transfer all the energy of your cast, your weight that you loaded up, or your fly line or whatever. It'll help pitch it way out there, versus the fiberglass rod, because it keeps flexing when you make your cast. It loses a bunch of the energy and then finally wiggles to an end.
Very interesting. Like, can you do tests in the store when you pick up a rod? Can you feel the sensitivity in it? How would you do that?
You can, it's challenging without having line through it to feel the sensitivity. You can wiggle it to see how fast it recovers and like how fast it stops. That's no problem. But is what you're mostly probably looking for when you're in a store is more the action of the bend of the rod. So the market, when you're downrigger trolling, or you want sort of more of a classic slower action to load up your rod down to the downrigger release clip, so when fish strikes, it springs up a whole bunch. Where when you're fishing walleye or bass or something, you want something that's a much faster rod, so you have a sensitive tip and you can see that the tip wiggles. And when you're, depending on what you're fishing, a spinner bait or a crankbait or a Ned rigging or something, and then you have a very powerful butt in the end. So when you do get a bite, you can quickly set the hook. And lots of times when you're fishing bass, you're actually fishing quite large hooks compared to other species and stuff. Like you're fishing 2/0, 3/0, 4/0, even 5/0 hooks, whereas walleye, you're more likely to be fishing a size 6 or a 4 or a 2, a much smaller hook. And so you don't necessarily want the same action, so you don't like just rip the hooks out of the fish's mouth versus a bass. Rob, walleye won't be in the same kind of cover that a bass is, bass under lily pads and all this stuff. So you end up actually fishing quite heavy. So if you hook one, he doesn't wrap around all the weeds and things and break you off, or you can winch him over the sticks and stumps and things like that.
Rob, the larger hook size for bass, is it typically because of the size of their mouth when compared to something like walleye, or why would you use a larger hook in that application?
More of it's the size of the baits you're fishing. It balances the baits out better.
I see.
If you're fishing a big frog type bait, you need quite a large hook. A small hook will just disappear into the lure kind of thing. So the fish will be able to bite the bait, but not get anywhere near the hook. Whereas lots of guys fishing walleye, if they're trolling with them and fishing plugs and stuff, they'll have a fair size hook there. But if they're fishing, worm rigs and things like that, worm harnesses, they'll have a much smaller hook. But the fish is going to you're most likely going to have a worm or a minnow or something on it. So they'll take it and swallow it deeper, and they're easier to hook that way.
Yeah, the bigger hooks will hold fish better too, especially when you're trying to drag them through cover and debris and stuff like that. But when a person goes to the store, they look on the edge of their rod, they're going to see that there's different actions. You were describing that in terms of a heavy action or a medium. What does that mean, and what do they look for different species?
Well, you'll see like medium or MH or XH on rods to describe the power of it. And then to really get the action, you almost got to grab the rod, and most people have it together. They'll put the tip on a piece of carpet down on the ground, and then they'll push down to see the flex it has, when they're looking for rods. And then when you're in a shop looking for a rod, you almost need to know what you think you're going to fish for. And in a lot of cases, default to the shop owner or one of the employees, say, hey, I'm going bass fishing or I'm going walleye fishing, and I need a new rod, and I'm looking to what about this one? And they'll guide you to most likely the correct action when you tell them what you're doing and what kind of bait you're going to use and throw.
Yeah, because there's everything from an ultralight, which is like a buggy whip for fishing small trout or panfish and stuff, but you don't want to hook into a 10-pound pike with an ultralight because it's hard on the equipment. You can break it, and it's going to be hard to actually land it.
Yeah, and hard to set the hook to in a lot of cases because a pike bait is going to be a big bait, overall, and you won't be able to strike hard enough to pull the hook into the fish and have them on. You'll have them on for a second and they'll fall off and you go, oh damn, what happened, and
right,
sort of thing. That's part of the rod action. And then another thing that's kind of different is in Western Canada, there's a lot of people are all fishing 2-piece rods. In Eastern Canada, the market's like tons of 1-piece stuff. So it really changes that way too. And a lot of the 1-piece rods are hard to transport. So, odds are you're going to have a boat versus a 2-piece rod that you put in the trunk of the car kind of thing.
That thanks for bringing that up, because 1-piece versus 2-piece, I would imagine sensitivity differences between the two are fairly evident. Is that?
It's not that evident any longer. Like they've gone a long ways on ferrules and things where you can see differences, and usually the biggest difference will be in the quality of the rod. If you take a 2-piece rod and and get a flex, a bend into it, have someone hold the tip and lift up like he was a fish, in a slow motion, you'll see the bend of the butt section of the rod. Then where the ferrule is on a less expensive one, you'll probably see a flat spot, and then the rod will continue to bend like it should, where a more expensive rod would bend properly through the ferrule.
More consistent.
And then, of course, 1-piece rods will just bend the way they're supposed to.
Right.
Yeah. Now, the good news is when people go shopping, a lot of times those rods and reels are already put together in the right combination. You talked about a 2500 with medium action 7-foot rod. Like someone looking for a nice walleye rod, that's probably going to work pretty good.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to say the price points on combos, they're kind of from beginner entry level up to kind of a mid-level. Because once you start spending, I don't know, like $100, $129 on a combo, odds are you know what you're doing more so. You're more likely to be like at least a intermediate type fisherman, or not, maybe not super avid, but a touch better than a few weekends a year weekend warrior. And at that point, you start, looking for a rod in particular and a reel in particular to match it. And you may end up with 2 or 3 brands. Like you might buy a Daiwa reel and put it on a Phoenix rod, or buy an Akuma rod and put a Daiwa reel on it, or vice versa. So there's so many different options, and a lot of people, a guy with certain size hands might feel that a bigger cork handle fits him better, feels better, versus a smaller person with smaller hands like a lady. Yeah. So there's lots of women's products made now, both color wise and handle size dimensions are made for to be more comfortable for a female angler to use.
Right. And I think what you're describing is the combos are great for people that don't understand a lot of it, but it'll give you a chance to feel the difference and start to understand the differences in equipment. And as you evolve as an angler, obviously you're going to collect a whole lot more rods and reels, but you'll start purchasing your rods and reels separately to get more sensitivity or more control or the benefits that you're looking for from the specific equipment.
Yeah, for sure. I can say when I go drifting down a river here for steelhead, many times I'll have 8 or 10 rods in my drift boat, just so you got different techniques, different things you're going to do, so you have them all rigged up, ready to go. You don't get to a spot and rig up for one technique, and then when you go to the next spot, re-rig your rod for a different technique. You end up having rods for particular techniques with different actions.
It's no different than a golf bag full of different golf clubs.
Well, I'm glad to hear I'm not an oddball here, because when I go fishing, I have one rigged up for jigging for walleye, and I have one for bottom bouncing, and another one for throwing some hardware at some pike or something like that. But I find that each one is more of a specialty equipment for what I'm targeting, and it gives me some advantages, or at least perceived advantages, that help me not only catch and hook fish, but land them as well.
But according to the wives, we only have one rod that does it all, right?
Well, no, because I know some ladies that have more rods than I do, and they try to explain the same thing to their spouse. So it's more of how avid an angler you are and how far you're willing to push things.
That's fair. Well, to my wife, I only have one gun in the gun safe, so.
Well, I could go. There's some companies, and one I used to deal with, they've got 12 different rods where they literally make a rod for a drop shot rig, a rod to fish jigs, a rod to fish Texas rigs, a rod to fish buzzbaits, a rod, like it's everything. They make a rod for each particular thing, and you pick them up, and a lot of cases you go, what's the difference? And they'll go, look, this one bends an inch more than the other one. Oh. Or it's like you a little faster, a touch slower. It's kind of crazy how deep you can go into it if you wish.
Yeah, I'm trying to create a basic understanding for the average person walking into the store so they don't get the wrong information, or they have the right questions to ask to get what they need. Tell me the species. Tell me where you're going to fish. Are you fishing in a boat? Are you fishing from shore? These types of things where they can get the right gear. So they go out. We want them to have fun. We want them to be successful. And part of that is knowing your gear and having the right gear in your hands.
Without a doubt. And when you stick with name brands like Daiwa or Okuma, you're getting quality. You're getting, something that you should have a good time with. It shouldn't have bad things happen, and part of that's like, I hate to say it, it's the more you pay, the better it gets, the more, and most likely the more enjoyable your experience is up to a certain point, like paying $19 for a spinning combo versus $59. The $59 one in most cases will be a much nicer rod, a much smoother reel that you can use for a long time, whereas the $19 one will be good for the weekend, but a year later or something, it may not work so well.
Yeah, so spend what you can afford, but quality does come at a price.
This podcast was made possible by Alberta Conservation Association and the Harvest Your Own community. If you're interested in harvesting your own food, there's a comprehensive collection of information to gain insight and knowledge. Head to the field, harvest your own protein, prepare it, and taste the results. HarvestYourOwn.ca is a library of information from getting started and geared up to processing, butchering, and cooking wild game to make the connection between health and food.
Rods and reels, we've covered them pretty efficiently. If we look at changes in the fishing industry, the lines have been probably more dramatic than anything. We talked about graphite and all the composites and different things. That was a major change too. But years ago, there was just a braided line, and it certainly wasn't the types of braids that we have today that our grandpas used. And then monos became very popular, and if people walk into a store, it can be confusing because there's extra limp and there's extra tough and there's fluorocarbons and there's a lot of different choices. And of course, the braided lines that we have today offer great sensitivity, instant connection with your hook, all these other things. But there's really not a line to do it all. They have their benefits. Can we dispel some of the myths out there so that anglers know what lines to look for the different fish they're after? Yeah,
well, there's a lot of the lines are, I'm going to say, the monofilament lines will be more for the reel you're using, because some will be softer, like more limp, more flexible. They'll ride better on spinning reels, and when you load your spinning reel up with a nice limp kind of line, it'll lie on the reel better. It won't take a set. When you go to cast, they'll smoothly come off, and work very well. And then there's you want a stiffer line if you're using like a conventional level line type reel, because the casting, the way it comes off the reel is different. So there's, that's two of the bigger things with monofilament, to truly look for a spinning reel line versus a bait casting conventional reel line. And then to a degree, when you know where you're going fishing, you may need some abrasion resistance, and odds are that'll be in a stiffer line than a softer line.
Right. So
monofilament.
Fishing bass and pike, you might want something that's a little bit stiffer because it has more strength and forgiveness if you're getting into the rocks and some heavy weeds and fish is rolling in it and pulling it in different directions or tying it up with the leader and stuff like that.
Yeah,
there are benefits.
The softer lines will mark up quicker, and then because it's a single strand, right, if you start stretching it at all, it'll break without a doubt. Whereas the more abrasion resistant ones, if you're dragging it over rocks, you could drag it over a rock like 100 times versus a soft line maybe twice, and it's, they're sort of wear out or they're not as strong as they once were.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because a lot of people think that mono is obsolete, but you talked about the stretch in it and stuff. I still like that for trolling baits for walleye because that stretch actually helps me hook fish. A lot of times when people are having troubles hooking fish or catching fish, it's because they're too quick on the reaction. They're pulling the hook away from the fish, and lots of times you put the rod in the rod holder, let that rod power up and get all that arc in it. A fish actually gets hooked when it tries to spit out the hook. So it holds it in its mouth, you got the hooks in there, and when it decides that it doesn't want it in there and opens its mouth is when that hook gets pulled in. So mono has some stretch. It's actually going to help you at times to hook up, where a braid is got no stretch. You have to be there to set the hook or know exactly what you're feeling.
It's a little bit more responsive is kind of what you're saying.
The braid is much more responsive.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, you'll be able to take a piece of braid, and there's zero stretch, none.
Yeah.
And you take a piece of mono, and depending on the model, the brand, and the type, you can sometimes stretch like a foot long piece. You can pull it out to 14 inches, right? Yes, and with the loaded rod, it definitely makes a huge difference on whether you hook the fish or not.
Yeah, so don't overlook having both. A lot of reels come with extra spools. I like to have both braided lines, and instead of having extra spools, Rob and I just have extra rods in the boat.
Yeah.
extra in the end, extra rods and reels, like combo set up, you're kind of better off with two rigs where you can have two different baits on and just change over. And then you don't waste a lot of time tying up. You kind of got an idea what you're doing.
Yep.
And so it's just you can grab and cast your, MEP spinner out and reel it in, and then grabbing your rattling bait plug and pitch it out and crank it in instead, and you're kind of good to go. And then depending on the lures and techniques you're fishing, sometimes you want to have a couple of bait casting rods in the boat and a couple of spinning rods, because the spinning rods, of the spinning combos, they won't overspin. And so if you're casting a really lightweight, you can cast it without any tangles per se and any issues. Where you start getting down to an eighth of an ounce or a quarter ounce with a bait casting combo, it's easy to cast it out, not thumb it right, and get a big backlash and spend half your day pulling out a backlash.
But if need be, having an extra spool with different line on, if you just have one rod reel combo, it's easy to just change that out.
If you're on a budget and you can't afford much, having the option is great. You go trolling, you have that. If you're vertically jigging in 20 feet of water, that braid is going to give you that instant feel.
Yeah.
A lot of times we don't, we picture fish coming up and voraciously biting a hook, but a lot of times what they're doing is inhaling a volume of water, and you see their gills flare, and that hook comes into their mouth, and you can barely feel a bit of weight. That line will help you. Same with a sensitive rod. That's why sometimes the combination of gear that we have gives us that edge, and it starts with an understanding of what a fish is doing down there to begin with.
Right. Yep.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people will spool your reels up with either braid, or a monofilament, and then it all goes down to a swivel where they tie a swivel on, depending on, no matter what brand you have, and then from your swivel to your lure, it'd most likely be monofilament. It's very rarely braid straight to the hook, because the braid is it's also a solid color. Fish can see it, whereas monofilament will come in an assortment of colors where you can get green or fluorescent, like a clear fluorescent or just a clear line. You can get blue. You can get different lines once again for different techniques. And last but not least, because if you're in clear water a lot, people do like to fish fluorocarbon. But fluorocarbon is much more expensive than regular monofilament, so most people only fish it for a leader. You don't sell a lot of, or see a lot of guys using their reel loaded with fluorocarbon line is like they're everyday casting line sort of thing. It's usually just leaders that have fluorocarbon because it refracts light so well, and it sinks quickly also.
But it's like it's like lying on steroids though too, because it's stronger, it's much more forgiving. Like even fish, like I was out on the weekend, we were fishing for walleye and pike, and I had braided line, but I had a 4-foot fluorocarbon lead, and I tied the jigs directly on. I didn't have to worry about the fish seeing it. I still had the sensitivity, but I had the strength. We caught, my biggest pike was 18 pounds caught without a leader, and the fluorocarbon stood up to it. So, you don't, you buy a spool of it, it lasts a long time because you use it for specific rigs that you're tying or for leader material, but it certainly has a place in terms of offering you an advantage fishing, not only from what the fish are seeing, but the strength for hooking, catching, and landing fish.
For sure. And then one of the bonuses or highlights to braid line, of course, is a 30-pound braid is like a 6-pound mono or a 4-pound mono in diameter versus, so you can get a much heavier line and a much smaller reel. So like when you're pike fishing there, if you were, you got a 30-pound braid as your line on a 3,000 size spinning reel, you're sort of good to go. You don't have to worry about them snapping you off, where if you had a monofilament on that same 3,000 size spinning reel, you might only have 8-pound or 10-pound on there, and you catch an 18-pound pike, he might, not get landed.
Exactly. So the advantages of each, it's interesting to look at this. I think we've actually provided a lot of insight into rods, reels, lines for the average angler to make a decision, and that's what Harvest Your Own is about. We're actually talking to an audience that wants to get into fishing or learn more about it or go to that next step. So providing information like this is really critical, and it allows people to make informed decisions. You can go into a fishing shop, talk to the people in there that are passionate about angling, and they actually have that information. So you can go in and speak their language to get what you need.
Without a doubt. I mean, no matter where you are, I'm going to say the big box stores, they're great for free thinkers or those that have a bit of a conscience and aren't sure what to do and they don't want to ask that silly question. They can go in and look around, but there's a really good chance they'll buy incorrect product if they don't know for the marketplace. So, but if you go into an independent retailer, in most cases, they live and breathe fishing. They got into the business because they like fishing. They didn't, they're not some of them aren't the greatest businessmen, but they love fishing. So they love their area that they're in, and they know all about all the little creeks and streams and lakes and ponds and, and things like that. And so if you go to the independent guy, they can set you up and tell you, like, hey, you're going to go to Bill's Pond here and you want to have this lure and this kind of line and stuff like that. So you get, sometimes the advice is worth a bit of an extra payment.
Yeah, it's that one more step in service. It's that information that they're sharing and providing that can make the difference. Not only do you get the rods, reels, lines, tackle, and everything else you need, but you're going to get advice on where fish are biting, how to fish it, where to go, and all the rest of it. So, and
you're supporting local too. You're supporting local mom and pop shops who that's their bread and butter passion.
Yeah, and they know the local fishery. We started this conversation there, right?
Yeah, and one of the other things they do, especially if you're more of an entry level to intermediate kind of person, you can buy a spinning combo. It doesn't come loaded with line, or if you buy your new reel, they don't never come loaded with line. And so most of them have a line winding machine, and you show up, you can bring in either your own line and say, can you spool it with this? Or you can say, hey, I want the reel filled with whatever product that you choose, and they'll fill it up there, and so you're set, ready to go when you're with them.
Yeah, that's a big bonus as well. The bulk line stations are great. It's a little bit more economical to purchase the line. They're going to fill your reel to the exact amount where it's not overspooled and coming off on you. So there's lots of benefits by going that route.
Yeah, and you don't buy 200 yards when you only need 165 or something.
Right, exactly. Well, thank you for your expertise today, gentlemen. I think we've provided some great information. I think we could do a whole other show on lures, hooks, slip bobbers, and all the other accessories that go along with fishing and how to take care of our equipment as well. But we wanted to cover Fishing 101, which was the basics, and I think we've done that in a great fashion.
Perfect. Well, thanks for having both of us on here, Brad, and it's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you, Brad.
Yeah, thanks, Rob.
Good.
We hope to inspire people to reconnect with nature and appreciate where your food comes from by harvesting your own. For more information on getting started or to learn specifics about the Field to Fork experience, visit harvestyourown.ca and follow on Facebook and Instagram. Check back often for new material, recipes, and videos that are posted regularly. Please subscribe to Harvest Your Own podcast and take the time to rate and review the show to help us build a dedicated core of passionate hunters as our regular audience. Until next time, embrace the outdoors and all it has to offer. Thanks for joining us.